HRN listeners. As we celebrate our 15th year, we are deepening our commitment to giving voice to the next generation of food systems storytellers, and we need your help. Our internship and fellowship programs help activate new possibilities for underrepresented and underestimated young people through experiential journalism, audio engineering, and production training. Through these unique programs, HRN helps food equity stewards build essential workforce readiness skills that expand their potential and foster economic mobility. Please consider supporting these critical programs. And with a minimum donation, you can be entered to win a dinner for two at an amazing restaurant in one of 8 cities and tickets to a concert at a great venue in one of those cities. We have incredible partners across the country who have donated, as they also share our passion for helping to educate the next generation of food systems storytellers. Check out heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. That's heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. And make sure you donate before March 31st. Thank you.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network. HRN is food radio supported by you. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org. Hey, welcome to Beer Sessions Radio on Heritage Radio Network. I'm Jimmy Carboni. I'm the host. It's our 14th season. We're doing a special show today, Colorado and New York IPAs with 2 brewers. So let's go around the room and you guys introduce yourselves. Geoff and Dave.
I'm Geoff Wenzel. I'm the R&D brewer at Industrial Arts Brewing Company in Beacon, New York.
And I'm Dave Thibodeau. I'm the president and co-founder of Ska Brewing in Durango, Colorado.
All right, so I've had you both on before, and not only are your beers great, you guys are great guests to have on. So we're doing a remote online tasting. Jeff's up in the Hudson Valley, New York, and Dave's in the western slope of Colorado, and they sent me beers as well. So I think we'll start by just each brewer will introduce the beer that they have. We'll start with your IPAs. And then we'll get them talking a little bit about their beers, and they'll start asking questions of each other like brewers do about hops and everything else. So I cracked the Ska, the Modus Hopperandi IPA first. So Dave, why don't you give us your backstory? We had you on last year. We know a little bit about Ska, but the beer and your hops and how you're brewing, and cheers. And I'm going to pour my beer out. So.
Yeah, I'll throw the caveat out there that I'm not the technical brewer by any means. Our brewers are much more skilled than myself. I can tell stories about the beer all day, but once we start getting very technical, I'll probably take a step back. But I know quite a bit about our beer, obviously. The brewery itself has been around since 1995, and we just celebrated our 28th anniversary this last month, which was fantastic. And I think the beer that we sent you was Modus Hopperandi, which is our flagship IPA. It's a classic West Coast IPA. I guess we could get into at some point maybe what a new West Coast IPA versus a classic West Coast IPA might be. And there's no shortage of opinions there. But yeah, and it's kind of, we built our new brewery that we still are currently in 2008, and we've been canning beer since 2003. We were the second craft brewery behind Oscar Blues to start putting beer in cans, and we came out with Modus in 2008 after a lot of R&D and a lot of talking about what we wanted to come up with, and we knew we wanted to come out with. We had only one beer for 5 years in cans, and that was just an ESB. And we knew we wanted to come out with a nice, dank, hearty West Coast style IPA in both bottles and cans before we switched entirely to cans. And so 2008 was when we were working on that, and we did a lot of R&D with the whole staff, a lot of tasting, a lot of talking about it, and after a while, developed a recipe, and I'll admit at the time, to me, it felt overly hoppy, And I tried to get our brewers to kind of tone it down a little bit, but everybody argued, thankfully, not to. And, I guess by today's standards, it's probably not nearly as chewy and bitter and piney and resiny as it seemed at the time. But to me at the time, it was over the top. I was clearly wrong, because within a year, it kind of took over most of our production, and has since kind of remained. It's seen a little resurgence right now, but it's stayed relatively strong for the past. It's now 15 years old, so that's kind of the story behind Modus. And I would say it's our flagship beer still to this day. It is our highest selling IPA, with our hazy IPA not far behind.
I'm so used to, Geoff, I'm so used to drinking new IPAs, hazy IPAs. Why don't you guys tell me what is a classic West Coast IPA? Because the minute I tasted it, the piney, the resin, but explain that to our listeners, because I know it when I taste it, but I also haven't had a West Coast IPA in a long time.
I mean,
yeah, Geoff, I could go ahead. I was going to say, go ahead and
yeah, I mean, to me, right, like you said, Dave, we all have there's no shortage of opinions. I probably even have 2 or 3 myself. But to me, like a classic West Coast IPA is definitely a bit more sea malt, like a lot more caramel malt character, and definitely a little more bitter than like a new style West Coast or American IPA. I think we have, in my opinion, hazy IPAs to thank for the lower bitterness threshold of today's drinker. But just like, to me, it's like a little more caramel malt, so a little more malt presence, like roasted malt presence, and then more piney bitter as compared to like some newer age West Coast, where it's more fruit forward, maybe a little less bitter, less sea malt, maybe a little drier.
What makes it taste more bitter?
that's
probably like some early kettle hops.
Yeah, exactly. So you actually get those IBUs from boiling the hops, and that's where the actual bitterness that's in the flavor comes from. And I mean, a lot of the hazier IPAs, you might not have any hops actually in the kettle. It might all be later additions in the fermenter or post hot side additions. And so I think, I agree with Geoff. That's pretty much the classic West Coast IPA. Piney, so a lot of the classic C hops and true C malt. But like Modus, for example, has Cascade, Columbus, Centennial, and you get a lot of not just the citrusy characteristics that a lot of the newer school hops also have, but you get a lot of pine and resiny flavor. Not that all classic West Coast IPAs use those C hops, but they do. I think for the most part, you do see a little more color a lot of the time due to the caramel malts, and then you do get the bitterness because of kettle additions with the hops. Whereas even a newer school West Coast IPA, still kind of classic. I don't think you see as much caramel in general, and I don't think you have quite as much bitterness. And you can use some of those newer school hops that are, have often been used in on the fermenter side. You start using those a little bit in the boil, and you get some actual bitterness from hops that, frankly, I've been used to drinking so many hazier IPAs that they're not really truly bitter. It's all an olfactory thing. You can smell the hops, but it's not really puckering when you taste it. And but I think with West Coast, you've got to have some true bitterness there and some true IBUs, whether it's new school or old school.
Yeah, I'd agree. We are, our company is comprised of some folks that have been in the brewing industry for quite a while, and Jeff O'Neill, the owner and founder, started out on the West Coast, so IPA was a big part of his contribution to the beer industry as a whole. And we've definitely veered closer to the aromatic side of hop usage. Our West Coast, or I think we call it American IPA at this point, which is, I don't know, say what you will, kind of semantics, but is Power Tools. And although we have a pretty healthy bittering edition, we still do some double dry hopping in that, some mid-firm dry hopping. So it's kind of, almost where the two worlds of IPA meet in some sense. And I guess our philosophy transfers to Wrench there as well, where Wrench, which is our hazy IPA, our flagship, pretty much, I guess it's probably over 70% of what we brew. Wrench is still a relatively bitter beer. I mean, we're clocking in at 60 IBUs on that thing. We're fermenting it out to 2.5, 2.6 Plato. So, I mean, the stats are very similar to a West Coast, but huge additions of oats and wheat, and maybe some earlier dry hops and the Citra Mosaic really drive that beer. But that's kind of been our philosophy, is like taking these new styles and putting our traditional experience or approach to them.
Yeah, I don't know if I was supposed to jump right into drinking Geoff's beers, but I did. And I'm drinking Wrench right now, and I really like the fact that there actually is some bitterness to this beer. It's a beautiful hazy beer, and it's got all those aromatics that you hope for when you're drinking a hazy. But I still, being older and a little old school and having a flagship that's kind of West Coast, I long for that actual bitterness in the flavor. And there's more bitterness than I'm used to, like even with our hazy IPA. That's really enjoyable. That's a fantastic beer.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate that.
It's hard for me almost to drink them side by side because they're so different. It's like my palate has to adjust to it. Now the Wrench has got some citrus in there too. What are you guys tasting them side by side? Because that was always the hardest thing, is especially with like certain kind of IPAs. It's like you get hooked. Once you're drinking it, it's very hard to go to any other beer.
To be honest, I didn't bring any Wrench home with me. I probably tasted 3 or 4 batches off the FVs today, but I'm just drinking the Modus right now. I don't know, man. It's really enjoyable, especially considering, maybe it's probably a little different out west, Dave, but out here finding like an old school, other than like your Sierra, finding those old school West Coast IPAs are a little few and far between these days. So it's kind of refreshing, brings me back to the old days of brewing when like this was IPA, that Centennial, Cascade, bunch of sea malt. Yeah, it's kind of a nice change of pace for me.
Like Geoff, I kind of messed up too. I climbed on and Armin was there and we started going through technical stuff and I never grabbed a Modus. So I'm just sitting here with a 4-pack of Wrench. But I'm pretty familiar with Modus, and Geoff's right. There's you don't see a lot of these. I mean, we're definitely in Colorado, and I was curious too if you guys were starting to see that out in New York a little more. There's definitely been a bit of a resurgence, and just looking at some of the industry data and scan data, you see kind of some of the classic kind of legacy IPAs are picking up some steam where they may have been forgotten about for about a decade. It seems like we're at maybe the forefront of a little bit of a resurgence of the classic kind of West Coast IPA, or at least even drop West Coast and just say more legacy IPAs in the realm of like Stone IPA, which is a good one that everyone kind of can relate to. That's been around for a while, kind of built the brewery on that brand. But those type of IPAs they're few and far between. And even here at SCA, we've kind of built, the second half of the second phase of our lives off of that beer. But everything we've been making for the last decade is, more biotransformation, more hazy, more later edition hops, and not so much the classic C piney, bitter beers. But it's kind of fun. And even myself, I'll admit it, I hate to, but I kind of haven't drank as much Modus the last few years as I always used to. And it's just because I've been into newer IPAs, but now it's a beer I'm revisiting more and more often. It's what I'm drinking every day in the tasting room, to be honest with you.
For you guys, tell me a few more of the old school IPAs you each used to drink.
Well, Jimmy, I was drinking Hurricane Kitty since 2003. But yeah, I mean, that was, the first brewery I worked for. So that was kind of what got me into IPAs. I definitely wasn't 18 when I had my first IPA. But I remember like putting it back, and, Tommy at the time was like allowing us to have a beer, or wasn't, whatever, in the cooler. So, you got to look cool. He's letting us drink a beer when we're, maybe not of legal age, which, you have to muscle it back. And then, here we are 3 years later. I'm like, all I want is bitter beer. And it's like this thing that, we like acquired a taste for. And now all the kids are demanding less bitter beer.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I guess that's what we're drinking now.
That's a good way to describe it. It's an acquired taste. It's also, like bitter coffee, where you don't think of it and then you're used to it, for sure. And that was Keegan Ales up in Kingston, New York, and respects to Tommy Keegan, who passed. But
yeah, that's why I mentioned it. No one can come after him now. So I'll let everyone know he gave us beers at 18. So, but yeah.
What about you, Dave? If you remember a old school West Coast IPA, you mentioned a couple.
There's definitely a couple that I have fond memories of that are still around. I mean, Racer 5. In Colorado, Odell's IPA that's still a go-to for me.
That's to me is the benchmark of IPA, to be honest. I was in Fort Collins for a couple of years, so Odell IPA is kind of like the benchmark of old school, as you said, like legacy.
Yeah, that's cool that you say that, Geoff. Because when I was telling the story of the beginning of Modus, everybody in the brewery gathered one day, and we had bought every IPA we could get our hands on in Durango at the time. And we did a blind tasting, and 100% of the people within our brewery chose Odell IPA as their top. And then that's where the conversation started about how are we going to make Modus? What do we want to be different? What do we like about that? And that was the beer. They're nothing like each other if you try them side by side. But that was the beer that kind of really, and ever since that day, I've been like, oh my God, you're right. It's the benchmark. So yeah, I'd say Odell. I was bringing up Racer 5 from Bear Republic. And then of course, like Blind Pig from Russian River. And I really like Elevated IPA just south of us from Albuquerque, New Mexico. That's our friends at La Cumbre Brewing. That's been around for a little while. It's got a lot of hops in it, but it was one of the earlier 16-ounce cans that was kind of leaning toward a classic IPA that has kind of shown up in our neck of the woods, and it's stuck around. And that's one I really enjoy too. But I'm glad you said that, Geoff. That's fantastic to hear about Odell's, because I feel the same way.
Yeah, I remember when I moved to Colorado, I was all excited. I got a job at New Belgium, and super stoked. And they make a bunch of fat tire and whatnot. Big huge brewery. Really great learning experience. And I remember I told my Jeff O'Neill, who I've been friends with since back in Ithaca, I was like, yeah, I'm leaving New York, I got a job at New Belgium. He was like, I really like Odell. I was like, oh, cool. But it's like a stone's throw away. So definitely got to drink a lot of Odell IPA, because at the time New Belgium wasn't cranking out Voodoo Ranger. So it was just, fat tire and triple. And
yeah.
So what about what was the benchmark style if it was Odell's? If you want to, Jeff, you want to tell us a little bit about what the hop profile was or anything?
Oh man, I mean, I think it's like that classic C hop. Like I think it like the balance of piney and citrus was just spot on, and the mouthfeel was really well done. They definitely didn't overdo it with sea malt, so like that kind of raisiny character that you get in a lot of the legacy stuff, especially by the time you get it on the shelf out here, isn't really there. Just like really dry and crisp and refreshing and a super smooth mouthfeel. And like, again, that balance between like being able to keep the bitterness, the maltiness in check with the bitterness, but not overdoing it. And then also the balance between piney and citrus for me, kind of did it. And I guess that's just kind of my approach or my preference in beers is just really good balance and not anything being too over the top.
Dave, how do you keep a legacy beer going?
That's a great question because I think, we've had conversations over time where, sales started to dip with Modus. And I'll be honest here, Durango is we kind of live in our own little bubble. The rest of Colorado is kind of a different world than Durango. And when we first started brewing, our first beer that we really came out and became our flagship was we just called it Pinstripe, and we called it a red ale, but the time we created it, we only named it that because the color was red. But it was until we came out with Modus, that was pretty much our flagship. And I'll admit to this day, it's still kind of the local beer that everybody drinks. So Modus took off in all of our other markets when we came out with it, but not really so much in Durango. And Durango, it's slowly over actually, a generation it's started to pick up some steam. But there's been times where we've said, we've talked about changing the recipe or the graphics or, some of the marketing around it. And I've held pretty firm to keep it what it's always been, just because I guess I'm more of a purist, and thinking back when we developed it, it's near and dear to my heart. And so it's kind of I never want to change that beer. If we want to brew a slightly different beer or tweak it, let's just brew a different fucking beer, And, but it's a great question because it did dip for a while. And now through no extra effort of our own, we're starting to see it grow again. And I think that's pretty organic. But I think as far as keeping a legacy, I mean, for a brewery that's been around as long as us, that's a hard question. When you're out there trying to sell beer in a grocery store and an independent store to a newer consumer, also to your old, loyal, older consumers, that may have been with you for 20 plus years. It's not a very easy question to answer. And maybe you could ask some of your future guests the same question and then send me what the answer is, because I don't have a freaking clue.
Well, Geoff's almost out of legacy brand now too, but
yeah.
Wrench came on. I remember. Let's go through the early days at Industrial Arts because it wasn't that long ago. But what did you start with first? It was industrial. Was it Tools of the Trade?
Yeah, I think Tools was the flagship. And forgive me, Mike McManus and Geoff have more knowledge. I came in a little later, but Tools was the flagship, which was an extra pale ale. So just like a dry, crispy, lightly dry hopped, all European pills malt, pale ale. And then Power Tools soon followed it, which is our kind of like ode to West Coast style, with a little, like I said, like a little bit more of a modern approach. So yeah, those were the big ones. And then, Metric, which is the pills, the German style pills. And then Wrench started as a state-of-the-art beer, like a one-off. And that's when the haze craze kind of took off. And, we got to give the people what they want. So they scaled up production on that hazy IPA. And now we got 4 beers in the Wrench family. And that's between those 4 beers, it's probably 80% of what we brew.
So what are there's Wrench and...
I'm sorry, yeah, there's Wrench, which is the hazy IPA. There's Pocket Wrench, which is the hazy pale ale. Torque Wrench, which is the hazy double IPA, and then Impact Wrench, which is the hazy triple. And in Torque and Impact, we use some of those old school C hops, and we'll use some Chinook and Centennial in those. And then in Pocket, we're using some things like Comet and Amarillo, just because those are the hops we grew up on and we loved. So being able to integrate those into that newer hazy style was kind of cool.
What do you guys think? Like this East Coast, West Coast used to be a big thing. This is the first show we've done like this in a long time, and it's fun, mostly because we're drinking the beers too. But what do you guys think? The East Coast, West? In this case, it's Colorado, New York.
That's a great question, and I think I like to eat up the fact that we don't call ourselves Midwest, but we are closer to the middle of the country, and it's I really have enjoyed. I mean, granted, brought up on once the industry started really kind of getting into hoppier beers. It was kind of a West Coast thing, but I think once you started to see those early versions of hazy or New England style IPAs, a la Heady Topper, that was really interesting to me, and to see kind of the growth and the craziness behind it. And I'll be honest, there was a lot of the folks that I know in Colorado kind of they shunned that idea, and but I think we did too to whatever extent. But I think what was really neat for us was to realize what you could do with hops that created different flavors at different times in your tasting experience. And I think it's without having those East Coast versions of IPAs starting to come out, I don't think we'd have nearly as interesting of a world here in Durango at the brewery as we do. It really opened our eyes to a lot of different things that we could do, and we've been working on some experimental stuff with the college here, Fort Lewis College, and individual hops and biotransformation, and none of that would have been taking place had it not been for really the evolution of hoppier beers on the East Coast, in a completely different style. So to me, I love it, and I love being in the middle of the country and being able to absorb both sides of it. Not that anything's exclusive to one coast or another, but to me, it's like, thank God it happened, and I think there's a lot for the West Coast and the East Coast, and whether you want to get territorial about it or not, there's a lot for the rest of the country to learn, just simply because it happened. And so I'm forever grateful, and I hope shit like this still continues to happen, whatever it might be in the future.
Yeah. Dave, what's biotransformation?
Okay, once again, I'm not the technical brewer, but really, I think in a sense, and Geoff, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a lot of different flavor components and attributes that you can get at with hops if you include the interaction with yeast. So if you're adding hops at a certain time, like during the fermentation process, for example, depending on the exact timing, the interaction between the yeast and the hops itself might create some flavors that in a nutshell, that you might not get from the hops alone. You might not recognize from late or even whirlpool additions from hops that are more aromatic, and also stuff that you don't get from the bittering side of hops. But you can get some flavor attributes that won't come about any other way. So even when you're familiar with certain flavors or profiles of certain hops, that can change depending on its interaction with the yeast. And that's a lot of newer hopping techniques that are coming to light right now. And I think that's where you get a lot of the really cool, like fruity stone fruit flavors and flavors that you really can't get through adding whatever hop it might be on the hot side, or even late addition, or even dry hopping. It's different when you're involving yeast. Is that a good summary, Geoff?
Yeah, I think that definitely covers the gist of it. I think some of the brewers out here out west really kind of hit this thing without even knowing it, just by adding hops mid fermentation. No one's really studying like what the science behind it and the biochemical reactions behind mid ferm dry hopping. It was just, well, the beer comes out fruitier when we put it in at this time, so
yeah,
we're going to continue to do that. And it just drove all the science behind it, where it's like basically the yeast, just to add to what Dave said, like the yeast is creating this kind of biochemical reaction to turn certain aromatic compounds, or maybe not that aromatic compounds, into different or more aromatic compounds. And just an example that comes to the top of my head is like geraniol, which smells like rose water. It's floral. Like coriander has a lot of geraniol, or hibiscus. Obviously, any flowers have a lot of geraniol. Biotransformation will turn that into, in some cases, citronellol, which is heavy citrus. So I forget who did this study. I was listening to an MBA podcast recently about a study of the rate at which geraniol was converting to citronellol. And also, like, you don't necessarily even need to use hops. Like, you could use an ingredient that's high in geraniol and still produce citronellol through biotransformation. But yeah, like to Dave's point, it's basically just a reaction that happens when you add certain compounds at a certain time in fermentation, or I guess it probably relates more closely to the yeast variety and the point in fermentation, or the level of activity that yeast has that produces.
This isn't just home brewing and choosing to do all grain.
Well, that's how it started. I mean, it was just dudes like, oh, what if I add the hops earlier? Oh shit, our tank blew out beer all over ourselves. Those are the lessons learned. But it also produced some really awesome tropical citrus forward beers that became the hazy IPA, which in my mind completely changed the way people brew the style. Not just hazy, but also West Coast or American IPA. Like Dave's like,
we're messing around with it with almost anything we make now, to some extent. Yeah. I think it's cool. It's you think about the evolution of beer and beer flavor over time and the thousands of years that it's been around, and nothing at this rate of speed. I mean, the flavors you get from hoppy beers today, I mean, they're so different and varied and diverse. I mean, there's a lot, obviously heavy citrus, but floral, and there's, I guess, all the stone fruits, the fruity stuff. It's just, I mean, it's amazing what has happened in the last decade, for example. And I think, like Geoff said, I mean, people just trying stuff, maybe just out of curiosity, is really what led to it. I don't think the science was really there, at least to an extent that it caught on a mass scale, until people just started going for it. But what you're tasting now, I mean, the evolution of the different and varied flavors and how vast they are, you just think about it. I mean, Jimmy, you've been drinking beer for a lot of years. It's what you're tasting nowadays. Like, you drank beer for 30 years before you were tasting all these flavors, right?
That's why when I'm drinking your modus operandi, it almost tastes completely new.
Yeah, and it's right. There's none of it in modus. We didn't do any of that in modus. It's old school for sure.
Oh yeah. Hey, we're going to take a short break. We'll be back in a few minutes on Beer Sessions Radio. All right. Hey, welcome back to Beer Sessions Radio on Heritage Radio Network. Hey, I'm Jimmy Carboni. I'm the host on Beer Sessions Radio, going into 15 years with Heritage Radio Network. Support us to become a member, heritageradionetwork.org. All right, we've been talking about hops, old school IPA classic West Coast, and we're just starting to talk a little bit more about hazy too. And we have Geoff from Industrial Arts and Dave from Scott Brewing. Geoff, like, what's the myth? It's like there's this myth now. There's always myths about what makes the hazy or whatever. And you guys, way back with, you guys have with your owner Geoff O'Neill, you've been on the cusp of so many neat things. The other day, I was walking around thinking, "Wow, how did this guy decide to name a beer Amazeballs?"
Oh, I forgot about Amazeballs.
And I'm only saying because I got to give a shout out to Geoff O'Neill because the guy behind Industrial Arts was, I don't know what he did before, but at Ithaca he made Flower Power, and that was suddenly, in the 2000s, that was the best beer in New York, the most interesting IPA. And then he went to Peekskill, and then I remember he was winning all these awards, and one was Amazeballs, which I don't even remember what he made it for, but it was fun as
I think
hell.
that was a Galaxy Dry Hop Pale Ale, if I'm not mistaken. Which you won, yeah. I think you won a gold for that for International Pale Ale at GABF. But yeah, I mean, Geoff has been at the forefront of hoppy beers and on the East Coast for a while. I mean, start with Flower Power. Definitely one of my early hoppy beers, which I think that came out in like 2008, 9. But yeah, I don't know. Geoff's just got something. I mean, he's just, his brain.
Geoff's special.
I don't know. I don't try to get up and I don't try to pretend to know what's going on up there, but there's a lot of wheels turning, a lot of different directions, and
Well, the reason I'm going there is because he just, as a brewer, he never misstepped. I'm sure everyone tries out different things, but when I go now, that you guys have been open a while, when I'm at I don't want to say regular bar, but regular bars where they don't really have a clear beer identity. If I'm in the New York City area and I see any Industrial Arts on draft, I'm going to order it because it just tastes good. And even in places where they may not put too much love into all the beers, the lines are clean on that one. It just comes out really great. And that's a whole new that's a whole new category. We have a homegrown New York State brewery that's become a go-to just because I know it's going to be good. And that I wasn't that way before, because before I was seeking out the most esoteric, small brewery. I would only drink in certain places, and I don't know if that's a talking point, but that is part of beer. That you guys have built the overall brand where if I see it, I'm going to order it. I'll ask Dave about that. Dave, you're drinking the Wrench, but what do you call that in your business or marketing? That if a brand's gotten to that level, in only a few short years.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. I mean, there's been such a proliferation of breweries, obviously, in the last decade or so, and if you can say that there's a brewery that when you see it on tap, you're ordering it. It doesn't even matter which beer it is. I mean, that's something pretty special, and I think, Geoff, you should be really proud of that, and because that's something there's 9,500 other breweries trying to achieve in the United States that are never going to get there. And I mean, that's the holy grail, if you're, especially for someone like me that's been around for a while, that sells, we're not nationwide by any means, but trying to sell beer even throughout Colorado, the breweries that we're up against, which they're all dear friends. So competition, whatever you want to call it, co-opetition, friends, brethren, that to try and be the brewery, that has the reputation for quality that where any given consumer at any given time just sees it on tap and goes for it. That's the holy grail. I mean, that's everything you hope for. It's why we put as much effort as we do into, like some of the work that we do behind the beers and some of the R&D, which we didn't really used to do, but since we built the particular brewery we're in now, the lab and our chemists and the effort that we put into that to try and be that brewery, like you just mentioned that Industrial Arts is I mean, that's what it's all about. Getting people coming back for more, to the point where they're so into your brand and so loyal because they've never been let down. You couldn't ask for more than that.
Yeah, Dave, thanks for the kind words. And as a brewer, that means a lot to us, Jimmy. So we appreciate it. My profit sharing check this year appreciates it as well. But yeah, I mean, truth is, we have a pretty deep bench at Industrial Arts. As you mentioned, Geoff has been brewing. I think he started at a Karl Strauss production brewery in the early 90s. Then he was at Drake's for a while, and then just kind of, in my opinion, made Ithaca beer what it is, and arguably made the space for Northeast IPA to be a thing with Flower Power. And then Mike McManus, who's our director of operations, was the R&D brewer at Omegang and worked a lot with Duvel and Boulevard. And our head brewer, Jess Reeves, spent a bunch of years at Tired Hands and made his bones up at, I always want to say Medieval Times, but that's the restaurant. I'm spacing on the name. He's going to be pissed at me. It'll come to me. It's a little brewery in Syracuse that's been around forever.
Medieval something. Yes.
I'll remember it randomly in a couple minutes. But then, and then quality is our highest priority. And the truth is, we taste beers throughout the fermentation period. We did 3 in-process tastings today. Our release protocol is very thorough. And then if a beer's not up to snuff, we're not afraid to dump it. And that's the truth. And, the best brewers in the world have to dump beer. And it's just kind of, setting your ego aside and recognizing when it's time to cut bait and let something go. So when Jamie Carboni goes to the bar, he doesn't get a batch of wrench that may have a slight off flavor. And that's really the truth. There's no real secret. We're just not really afraid to dump beer to make sure our customers know that they're going to get the highest quality product that we can give them.
It's why I see it in some bars where they don't really have a commitment to craft, but the fact that they'll have Industrial Arts on that line means that the quality and consistency is a big part of it, and the fact that it sells. Because there's certain bars that don't mess around.
Yeah.
They're not picking favorites; they only pick what their customers are buying. And it just, again, I have to give you credit for that, because I feel like the industry's evolved so much that I know you guys are doing something right. I want I want you to jump in, because I know that Geoff is drinking your beer, the Ska Modus Operandi, and you're drinking the Wrench Hazy. Let's talk a little bit more about the Wrench from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I touched on it a little bit earlier. It's got all of the attributes that I really love from a hazier style IPA. It's got, I'm gonna kind of taste it while I'm talking, but you get I'm just smelling it right now, and there's tropical fruit in there for sure, and it's got all those aromatics that I really enjoy, that are kind of I don't know the right term. I don't want to say refreshing, but yeah, sort of. I don't know if I would say the same thing. We were just having this discussion earlier today about if refreshing is a good adjective when you're talking about beers in the winter. Does anybody want to be refreshed in the winter? Or is that a summer thing? I don't know. So I don't know what I might say in the middle of winter, But right now it's like, yeah, it smells like something I really want to drink, as beautiful as it is outside. This smells like a beer I really want to drink. But then when you actually go and taste it, I just love that there's actually a bitter backbone to it. And it's not over the top by any means, but man, it's like, that's what my taste buds crave. And it's very Citra, maybe Mosaic.
You nailed it.
Yeah. Those are two hops that I love. And obviously most people do. But it seems like it doesn't seem as complicated of a beer as it probably is. I would say there's not that many different types of hops in it, but I think, and you look at it, I mean, it's the perfect color to me. It's the perfect turbidity. Like it's the right amount of haze. And I mean, it looks like a beer I want to drink. I smell it. It's absolutely a beer I want to drink. And then I'm completely rewarded with a little bit of a bitter backbone, which is something that I think makes a hazier beer, gives it that upper edge. Our hazy IPA doesn't really have a bitter backbone. We sell a lot of it. It's a delicious beer, but I honestly, I really like this. It's fantastic to me.
Thanks, Dave, man. Those are kind words from someone who's been in the industry as long as you have.
Yeah, I mean, it's exciting for me to for this long. It's kind of like there was a good decade there where, it was all about just making the beer as bitter as possible, and that.
Oh, the bitter wars.
Yeah, that rubbed me the wrong way. It really did. The bitter wars rubbed me the wrong way.
Yeah.
And now it's all about different flavors. And I mean, that's different. You're not just trying to burn somebody's face off. And that it seemed like we spent 10 years trying to burn each other's faces off until we couldn't taste a good beer anymore, So, yeah, the bitter wars. I'm glad they're over.
I leave melting my face off to other vices.
Right.
Is that what you call it, Dave? I mean, Geoff, the bitter wars?
Yeah, that's what it was called, right? It was like, what was it, like 2000, maybe 5 or 6 to like 10, I don't know, where people were just coming out with like, this beer is 140 IBUs. It's like, you can't even perceive, your tongue can't perceive past 80. And like, let alone, actually, I don't know if you guys know the podcast Ologies, I don't know if I'm allowed to shout out other podcasts, but they had, they had this whole sensory episode. My wife listens to it, and I don't really listen to it, but she knows I'm into sensory, so she turned me on to it. Whereas like they're going over bitter, like bitter is actually a taste we've evolved to sense, basically to tell us something is poison. So it's like this weird thing to where now we've acquired this taste to appreciate bitterness, where it's really designed to tell us not to drink or eat something, but here we are. And then people are shoving 100 IBU beers down our face, down our throats.
So tannins in red wine over bitter coffee, everything.
Yeah.
But I'm glad those days are over, and we could just talk about a balanced bitterness.
Well, it is neat. But so what is it in the wrench that gives it that bitter finish that Dave's talking about? I don't see you guys when I'm on remote. I'm like, I only think about who I last mentioned, so I'm saying Geoff all the time.
All good. We can just let it roll. Yeah. Well, we use some some hop extract for a bittering addition for wrench, and just don't go too high. And then we pull a very small amount of bitterness out of our. It's not really, not to get too technical, but it's not really a whirlpool. It's our sedimentation tank, which basically acts as a whirlpool. We pre-cool most of our work hitting those late hot side addition hops. So we're hitting those hops at about 80°C to just retain some of the aroma, the oils, and also reduce the amount of bitterness we get from those hops. So yeah, I mean, we just tailored the recipe to be a little bit bitter. I mean, like I mentioned, we're all kind of we've all kind of came up with a little bit of an old school mentality. So we put that kind of spin on this on Wrench, where we're not just gonna give you a super sweet, no bitter beer. We're trying to make it balanced so it's drinkable and, as Dave said, apparently refreshing. But yeah, I mean, we just want people to drink it and enjoy it, not like challenge. It's not a challenge to put one down. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Hey, let's we're going to speed things up, but since you each sent me kind of the next level up of a similar beer. So I have with Wrench, Geoff, you sent me Torque Wrench.
Oh yeah,
the double IPA, and Dave, you sent me with Modus Operandi. You guys sent me the double Modus Depot. Why don't you give me each a quick little summary of all the obvious things, the alcohol, but what's different about the double IPA versus the IPA in each case? Is it they're different hop malts? Is it just the alcohol content?
Go ahead, Geoff.
I'll go first, I guess. Yeah, Torque. So obviously more alcohol means a bit more malt. Because of that, we added a little bit more oats than we would in a Wrench. And then we also added some Vienna malt just to give it a little bit more malt flavor to kind of give that malt sweetness or a perception of a double. And then the hopping's a bit different. Still use some Citra Mosaic, but we also toss some Simcoe in there. That's probably a house favorite hop, Simcoe. So yeah, just to kind of differentiate it from Wrench a little bit and make that hop profile a little more complex. It's probably I'd say roughly about half Simcoe. And then Cascade whole cone. We use a decent amount of whole cone in all of our IPAs. We kind of think it provides a good, like I like to refer to as like a good hop depth. Gives a more floral, spicy hoppiness, and just adds some depth to a typical hop profile.
What does the Simcoe do to it? First thing is, what does the Simcoe do to it? And the last thing is just with the higher alcohol and using, different malts to kind of round that out.
Yeah.
What do you need to do with the hops to make it? In some ways, I think I always, if I'm out, I just want one drink, I'm going to get a double IPA these days. So
yeah.
Why do I want that more than a regular IPA?
The Simcoe is pretty well known for its like heavy grapefruit. So that kind of adds that heavy grapefruit, which is like a little more on the punchy side of citrus, which Citra can be kind of, I don't know, like more orange and generic citrus aroma, and then also a little bit tropical. The Simcoe is like, to me anyway, pretty strong grapefruit, and also adds a nice layer of like pine. And then we just add a little more bittering extract, honestly, to kind of counteract that sweetness. So there's a little more bitterness in Torque Wrench, and then our fermentation profile is slightly different with high ABV beers. We go in a little cooler and let that free rise to try and reduce the amount of like those higher fusel alcohol, so it's not as boozy. It's still drinks really smooth. Yeah, that's pretty much the big differences.
Little sneak peek into the brewer's craft, and then Dave, for you, your end, from step up from Modus to the double Modus Deepa, you can describe it in your way.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I love the fact that Geoff, that Simcoe's a house favorite hop for those guys. We feature it heavily in a seasonal pale ale we have in the winter called Euphoria, and it's one of my favorite hops. When I first encountered it, I love that hop. I think that's really the only beer that it's really a showcase in for us, but it's a fantastic hop, especially when you really do get that grapefruit from it. It can really make a really nice beer that if you're trying to showcase a little bit of hop character. With the double modus, we just came out with it. We just released it a couple weeks ago, and I mean, our tagline on it is now with even more modus, and that's literally what it is. It's not a true double version of modus operandi, but for the most part, all we did was up the existing ingredients in the regular modus operandi, and it's 9% ABV. And I mean, what's really weird for me, and I need to get into some more of our sensory with that, and do some more taste panels, because we haven't really, between traveling and just this and that, and how recently we released it, we haven't had a chance to sit down as a group together and really talk about, what is this beer versus, its little brother, and what are we seeing here, and what are we experiencing? But when I had them side by side, it's really weird to me, but I almost felt like the double modus was an easier drinking beer, even though all we did was up everything. I mean, it might have a little bit. I mean, at some point, with hops, you start to hit that point of diminishing returns, like we were talking about during the bitter wars. You get over 80 IBUs, and what are you even talking about anymore? And but so I think there's a little bit probably of malt shining through that maybe balances it a little better. But man, it's such a smooth double IPA. It's bright, it's crystal clear. And it's still got, some caramel malts in there, so it's got color to it, and it's heavy on the C hops, so you do get a lot of pine as well as citrus. And yeah, like I said, we just say now with even more modus, but we figured at 15 years, let's just make a double version of our flagship IPA, and let's see what people think. And if it weren't for the fact that 9%, just I don't feel good about drinking two of those and driving home after work, it would probably be all I drank at work at the moment. I'm excited about the beer, and it's fantastic, but it's definitely a wait till I'm home, or at least within walking distance kind of beer.
Let's make a toast to both your IPAs, and I'm going to say that if I'm going out this week, I'm probably going to go for a double IPA first. So, and thanks, Geoff, for giving us a little insight into it, because you always wonder that there's a magic and a chemistry to all the great beers. And thank you, because I feel even better about why my choice is to go with double IPA, because it sometimes it's more mouthfeel, and I like the little higher alcohol without having the heat of the alcohol. So it's the same way I always liked drinking a Belgian triple.
Yeah.
A Friday night beer, I like to start with a good Belgian triple. I think that there's things we don't usually talk about. We don't usually talk about so many brewing techniques, but you mentioned the temperatures. You want to take a stab at what makes a good Belgian triple so drinkable, even though it's stronger?
Yeah,
because I always feel like it's the same turf as the double IPA.
I brewed triple for a bit. Obviously, it's a very yeast-driven beer, but triples are typically a lot of sugar, a lot of either sucrose or dextrose or candied sugar, I guess, if you're being traditional and don't care about cost of goods. But yeah, to me, that kind of slow start to fermentation and a gradual increase in fermentation temp really helps limit the activity of the yeast, because with a beer like a triple that has so many simple sugars, the yeast is just going to want to engorge themselves on that simple sugar. It's just so easy for them to eat. like those monosaccharides as composed to the disaccharides, which are a little more difficult for them to chomp at. So you really want to tamper down. I mean, obviously, again, this is my approach to it, but I really want to tamper down like the rate at which that happens, and keep that yeast in check. Also underpitching it to help that yeast produce some esters. As we know, like those Belgian triples are typically fruity. Those aren't from hops. Those are from yeast esters that are produced during some stressful conditions for yeast. So just kind of keeping that fermentation tampered down so you're not producing like those higher alcohols. You know, I know a lot of people maybe prefer to smell beers and smell booziness and be like, ooh, that's boozy. But I want you to drink a 10% beer and think it's 5% and not really be able to perceive the alcohol. I want you to perceive the yeast esters. And I mean, I guess in the case of a triple, pretty much just the yeast esters do most of the talking. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of always been my approach, just a gentle fermentation to start and a gradual increase in temp to get that yeast, keep that yeast happy.
All right. Well, thanks, Geoff. And then Dave, close us out. One special moment from the tales of Ska Brewing.
Oh, on the spot.
Yeah, I'm interested in this, man.
We've had a lot of special moments, and I can't remember very many of them due to double IPAs. But
they were that special.
I think really when we made a big jump in, it's been interesting because we've got our brewing brethren in Colorado, the Left Hand, Bristol, Avery, Odell and New Belgium, but they're just quite a bit larger. It's almost another scale. But over all the years that we've all a whole bunch of us opened within a year or two of each other. And I think it was really neat for, 10, 15 years where we shared a lot of information. Obviously, we didn't have as much access to the information that we do now. But when we got to the point in 2008 where we were able to build our own brewery instead of kind of working our way around a warehouse as renters came and went and we were trying to grow, we finally got to build our own brewery in 2008 from the ground up on a piece of land that we purchased. And I think, having our grand opening in September of 2008 was kind of because I opened this when I was pretty young and I didn't know anything, and I did not expect to make a career out of it, to be honest with you. I had no idea it would continue. And when we actually built something from the ground up and we're a part of it, I hadn't even built a shed in my backyard. I had no idea how to do anything. And that year and building this brewery and getting to the point where we opened it up and we actually it felt real. And the grand opening that year, I'd say that was probably one of the most special moments of my life. I mean, shy, of course, of my marriage and my child being born, but it was something else. And it really changed kind of how I thought about beer and how I thought about the industry. And it made me grow up in a hurry. I was a punk ass kid and I didn't know or care much about anything at all. And suddenly it was time to put on my big boy trousers and figure out how to pay for all of that. And I think I learned a lot as far as leadership and management and brewing beer and understanding other people's opinions and thinking about what other people thought, because I can't, as pure as I wanted to be, my own little world wasn't going to pay for that new building. But the support we've had for all those years in our crazy little town and in Colorado has just been fantastic. And it all really, I can define that one particular moment where I realized, holy shit, we bit off a lot, but it's going to be okay.
Sweet, man. Listen, this is good. I'm going to keep drinking these beers. And but Torque Wrench and Wrench from Industrial Arts and Modus Operandi IPA and the Double Modus Deepa from Ska Brewing. So, Geoff and Dave, thanks so much for joining me here on Heritage Radio Network. Big shout out to our engineer, Armin Spengen, and we'll catch you next time on Beer Sessions Radio. All right.
Cheers.
Thanks so much, guys.
Cheers.
Beer Sessions Radio is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network. Food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.